And the difference between fiscal and monetary policy. We're going to do so that here in a little while you can then sit down and try to figure out what the fiscal and monetary goals should have been for the newly created United States. You get a clean slate. What should they have been? What should you have done with them? But of course, in order to do that, you've got to know what the difference is between fiscal and monetary. So the first thing I need you to do is, got three guys on the board up here. Anybody have any idea who these three dudes are? Okay. Okay, this is the guy that we have right now. He's Federal Reserve chairperson. He's been dealing with all the stuff that's been going on. Okay? The other two guys. Casey.
Well, I know Paul Volcker was in the 70s. He was the head of the Federal Reserve.
Right. So as you deal with your push class, he comes up especially when you deal with Reaganomics and what happens with Reaganomics. The other dude. So if they're both Federal Reserve dudes.
Wasn't that Ben Bernanke's successor or prior
predecessor?
Yeah, predecessor, and Ben Bernanke succeeded him.
Yes.
But he was during the Clinton administration mostly.
Yes. The Bush Senior, Clinton, Bush Junior years. So all three of these men have been in charge of the Federal Reserve System, which of course deals with the banking industry here in this nation. These guys are going to be the ones that are going to end up directing monetary policy. Before we get to monetary policy, I want us to try to figure out what fiscal policy is all about. I've got a clip that I want you to watch, and this clip is actually Ben Bernanke talking to a group of teachers in December, just this past year, about fiscal policy. And from what he says, and I just want you to jot these little things down on your piece of paper. From what he says, what are some of the things that you think fiscal policy then involves? Okay, so that's what I want you to do with this.
Go ahead.
Okay. What fiscal policy measure would help the economy and the Fed's monetary policy stance?
So I first have to say that the Federal Reserve is nonpartisan, so we have to be very careful not to take one side or the other in terms of one fiscal issue or another. Before I try to jump into that for one moment, let me just make sure that say how important it is that your kids understand the difference between fiscal and monetary policy. And I think that often that distinction is not often so clear. Fiscal policy, of course, has to do with the federal government's spending and tax plans. And of course, the Federal Reserve has nothing to do with that. What we do is manage the money supply, which helps affect short-term interest rates and therefore inflation, and also affects growth. But there are two very different sets of policies, and I think sometimes people don't really distinguish those two. And again, the policymakers are very different because fiscal policy is made by the Congress and the administration. We try to advise them when we can, but of course they're responsible, whereas the Federal Reserve independently makes monetary policy. On fiscal policy, we have a very difficult situation because in the short run, we have an economy which, even though we're in a recovery, is still far from full employment. And so in that sense, there's a lot of desire, incentive to provide additional support to the economy, and at least not to cut spending or raise taxes in a way that would be bad for recovery. But on the other side, we have very serious long-term budget problems, as you know, as our society is aging, and as medical costs keep going up, the government's obligations to pay Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, among other things, mean that we have very, very serious long-term fiscal debt situation. So we're kind of caught between the desire in the short run to be more expansive and in the long run to be more frugal. And that's a hard combination. And I think, if possible, I think combining those two in that way is the right way to go. In other words, whatever we can do to persuade the public that we, and I say we as a country, talking about Congress, that we are serious about tackling our longer-term budget issues, that we're going to take the steps necessary to reduce our long-term debt, that in turn would give us more space, more flexibility to move, to be more expansionary in the short term. So that's the challenge, is to find ways to credibly commit to reducing our long-term debt, and in doing so, would give us additional flexibility if we decided to use it to help support the recovery today.
Okay, Federal Reserve's supposed to be nonpartisan, but when he was talking about fiscal policy, Casey,
Fiscal policy deals with government spending on programs and how they get their money through taxes.
okay, government spending. So let's talk first about how they get it with taxes. What are some of the different kinds of taxes that we have out there? Okay, we have income tax. What else? Tim?
Property tax.
Property tax, good. Sales tax. Most of you all pay that in a variety of different ways.
Tariffs.
Okay, tariffs is a kind of tax, and we just talked about that in class the other day. So these are the way we get an income. This is the government's money in order to spend. So then what do they spend the money on? Okay,
Plans like social security.
okay, Social Security. What were some of those other things that he listed with Social Security?
Like Medicare.
Medicare. Medicaid, he also said, and I want you to keep in mind that that's at the state level. Okay? Medicare is for the retired. Medicaid is primarily for poor and children at the state level. Okay. Okay, welfare. These right here are referred to as transfer payments. Okay? They're taking money and immediately moving it out. It doesn't really sit in the government pool. And it's not like it's in some kind of savings account where they're earning interest. The money comes in from the taxes and goes right back out in order to keep money supply moving. What's some of the other things that then just sit there, goes right back out, in order to keep the money supply moving and impact the economic growth? So what are some of the other things that our government spends money on?
Military.
Military.
It's a big one.
Okay, what else?
City maintenance.
Okay, so city maintenance.
Would that be under government programs?
Yeah, you're dealing with the spending, government programs. City maintenance is more like at the local government level, and not necessarily at the federal, local, but still something that's spent money on.
General special interest projects.
Such as,
Anything really, I mean, anything that they deem is appropriate, like, for instance, alternative energy.
okay, so maybe some research and development. For the last several decades, a lot of research and development has happened with NASA.
Education.
Okay, education.
Food stamps?
Okay, food stamps, which is a form of welfare.
Like expansion and transportation.
Okay, yeah, in fact, Obama just recently started talking about a high-speed rail situation, trying to create more of a railroad in this country in order to maybe cut down on the usage of our oil and gas consumption. Let me ask you this. According to Ben Bernanke, did we take in enough money?
No.
Okay. So, I'm going to show you another clip. Some of you may have seen it in another class. And when you look at this clip, I want you to think about what this does to our ability to have an appropriate fiscal policy. I'm sure there's all kinds of things within Congress where they want to do certain things, certain projects. They want to do expansion of roads and fixing roads and providing students with more grants and loans, but they may not necessarily have the money to do that. So when you watch this, what I want you to do is I want you to really think about how does this impact the fiscal policy that may or may not be developed.
Recently, President Obama made news by announcing that his team would find $100 million worth of federal spending that they can cut from the budget. Some people are saying that the president is just taking a number that sounds big so that it'll look like he's doing something about federal spending. We humans have a problem with big numbers. We hear that the president is taking $100 million out of a $3.5 trillion budget, but what we understand is the president is taking a big pile of money out of a bigger pile of money. We don't get the concept of scale very well when we're dealing with that kind of money, and I think we can understand better. Let's stack 5 pennies together and say that this represents $2 billion. This is the federal budget, about $100 in pennies. Well, just a little under 90 after I take out the leafy pennies and the ones from my birth year and the pennies with the Queen of England on them. I think it's a Canadian conspiracy to ruin our monetary system. To the left of the white line is mandatory spending. Before we can fix a single road or build a bridge or pay a soldier, we have to spend this money. It's mainly Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. President Obama couldn't cut spending from there even if he wanted to. To the right of the white line is the only part of the budget he can reduce. To the left of the blue line is money we have. To the right of the blue line is money we don't have, so we have to borrow it. We'd obviously like to reduce the number of pennies on the right side of the blue line if we can. Here's what President Obama says he's going to do. We'll just grab that penny there. Then we take 3/4 of our penny, and we put it back on the budget. And the president's team is going to take 90 days to find some way to take this out of that. And suddenly, $100 million doesn't seem as big to me as when he said it in the press conference.
I just love those pennies. Those pennies crack me up. So, scale, knowing how it works. So, when we look at those lines, isn't really the line that any fiscal manager, any president, any Congress has to deal with is really the line from the white line to the blue line? Because on the other side of the blue line, what are we doing? That's a lot of money to borrow, isn't it? Yeah. We like to borrow money though, don't we? I've been doing it for a while. So when you look at those pennies and you get the idea of scale, on here, what do we spend most of our money on?
Medicare, Social Security.
Okay, so that's where most of our money's going. So what does that mean for the rest of this?
I think it's cut.
Back burner? We've got this economic situation in this country where there's a lot of people out of work. That doesn't mean there isn't a lot of things that need to be done. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm driving down Buckner Tarzany over here, and I'm usually trying to avoid the potholes. You agree with that? Oh, you just go right through. Who cares about the car, not me. So, do we need to fix that? But the roads, where does the money come from to fix the roads? Government. And if we're spending most of that money here, what does that mean the government can or can't do with their fiscal policy goals for the rest of the country?
Can't do everything.
Can't meet the goals. It's not that we don't have the goals, right? We just can't really meet them. So is there a limit to what fiscal policy is able to accomplish with the economy? Why? Okay, so they have a limited amount.
how much money or the money, they just control where it goes, like how it's spent.
Go into that a little bit more detail for me.
So like, they're not the ones actually distributing the money, they're just the ones spending it on things, like they're not making it or holding it back, per se.
You mean they're not printing the money?
Yeah, they're not printing it or printing less.
Or printing less?
I
Okay,
guess.
so basically, they're just dealing with whatever supply they have.
Yeah.
So they have to deal with just what's out there. What else is going to impact their fiscal policy goals? Okay, and if you've got high unemployment, does that mean what does the government not then get?
They're not obviously getting income tax.
Okay,
They're
so,
probably getting a lower amount of sales tax because if you're out of work, you're probably getting welfare checks and whatnot, or unemployment checks, and then you have to pay them for unemployment, and they probably don't buy as much either. So there's less, they have to give out more money to people who don't have jobs, who can't spend as much to give them back money.
okay, so basically, when you have high unemployment, then the government has even less money to deal with, and what happens to those pennies on the other side of the blue line? It grows. Now, do you hope that if they grow the numbers of pennies on the blue line, the ones that we're borrowing, do we hope that after a time it's gonna get people back to work?
Yes.
It's the hope, it's the goal, right? Yeah. So with this, when they're looking at their fiscal policy, where would you want to put the money?
Education. Just say, what do you want to fix, the short term or the long term?
Okay, so you have to determine short term or long term. And is that something that Ben Bernanke had been talking about earlier?
Yeah.
So what did he say was the short term situation?
To give more people jobs.
Okay, so it was the workforce. What did he say the long term problem was?
Pay off debts and give people more education.
Okay, that debt, and our debt keeps accumulating. We hear a lot about it in the news.
Did you also say that the short-term problem was that they can't take a whole lot out of the budget because it would hurt their recovery?
Yes, we're limited. The Congress, President are limited in what they can and can't do because they've got this issue. Okay, we got this debt, we got this recovery, that if we mess with the recovery,
We go straight back down.
right,
But
we
if
go
we,
straight
but
back.
if we, it would affect the long term too, because if we have to keep borrowing, if we increase our debt to make the recovery keep going, then either way,
We're doomed. So basically what I'm hearing you say is that we're between a rock and a hard place.
Scandinavia.
Just go someplace else, huh? Start over? Let's start over.
Start helping them with their money.
I don't know, I'm not sure if there's too many other countries out there that maybe really want that kind of help. So, that short term and long term is going to impact that fiscal policy. Now, let me ask you this, with congressional members, people who are in Congress, what are they going to be focused on?
Short term, so they can get reelected.
Okay, it's all about getting reelected, right? So is anybody going to want to hurt anybody right now?
No. Even if it was the right thing to do.
Even if it was the right thing to do. We don't have anybody willing to fall on their sword and take it for the team, right? So, fiscal policy is something that's primarily government, primarily Congress. Because if you remember all the way back to your civics class, when the Constitution was developed, those in the colonies had gone to war because of, what was the big phrase?
Taxation without representation.
Right, and so by golly, they're going to create a Congress that's going to have representation, and Congress has all the power when it comes to the money. Now, president can come up with a budget plan.
Ideas, so that can get shot down pretty easy.
So we send it to Congress, and Congress gets to what?
Pick the part,
Pick it apart and then
Add
change
things
the
to it.
form.
vote and deal with that. Right now, they're in the process of all kinds of negotiations, because if they don't come up with a budget that they can agree on, government's gonna get shut down.
Which would be very bad.
Yeah, all the social security offices close until Congress can get their act together. You know, all the unemployment offices close until they get their act together. Oh, all the IRS offices will close until they get their act together.
There's always a silver lining.
Yeah, we may have to find them, but there's always a silver lining. Okay, so right now you've got Congress that's really trying to work on figuring out how they can come to some type of compromise. And of course, depending on how the ideology goes, makes a big difference. That ideology becomes those partisan ideas. You know, are you a moderate Republican? Are you a conservative Republican? Are you a Tea Party Republican? Are you a Democrat? Are you a blue dog Democrat? Are you a liberal Democrat? Can I get all those people to agree? And when they finally vote on something, is there gonna be things in there that they like and dislike? Yeah. I can honestly tell you, I love my husband dearly. Love my husband dearly, married 22 years, love him dearly. Haven't kicked him overboard yet. But is there some days where I wanna take his nose and put it someplace else because I disagree with him?
Never.
And why would I wanna do that? Yeah. So, yeah, I don't always agree with everything my husband says or does, but that doesn't mean that I don't still believe in what we have together. And that's what we've got to be with our government, too. Our government is, well, I wish they could do their job just a little bit better, but they're doing okay. You know, we haven't fallen apart yet. Okay.
Stressing me yet.
Well, you know, that Roman Empire kind of thing, you know, watch
They
that.
had a lot bigger run than we did. We're like, what, 250 years? They had like, what, 500?
Yeah, they went a little longer than we did. So who knows? We might, you know. But keep in mind, they did the Roman Republic, and then they went into the Roman Empire, and then they crashed and burned. So, all right.
We had Dark Ages after, it was great.
Dark Ages might, you know, be fun. You know, a little mayhem here and there, you know, let the nights out.
Everyone goes back to hitting each other with sticks. That would be great.
But will we have to worry about fiscal policy goals?
No.
Don't worry about how many claims you have.
Okay, so fiscal policy, government, Congress, the decisions that government and Congress makes. That's fiscal policy. And unfortunately, it's very susceptible to the winds of public opinion and who votes and who doesn't vote. And I always love it when I hear somebody moaning and groaning and complaining about what government's doing. You know, and then you ask them, well, did you vote? I didn't vote.
Never heard somebody talk like that.
Okay, so it's, you know, we don't have we're allowed to all participate. I don't know if we necessarily do participate. So our goals and our debt situation, that all those pennies impact what Congress thinks they can and cannot do, and then impacts what actually happens to the rest of us. They feel that they need to spend more money on Iraq. What happens to the Department of Education? They decide, well, we're not going to give money to NASA. Well, what happens to research and development?
Dies.
It dies.
Yes, it just dies.
Is major industry corporation going to pick up their research and development since the government's cutting back on theirs?
Well, probably not.
They don't wanna spend their money whenever it used to be free.
Okay.
Honestly, yeah.
Okay, so the corporation's not gonna pick up because they've gotten very used to the government taking care of that.
Yeah.
Does it then impact what happens to us economically in other areas?
Yeah. If you're not coming out with new products, then, for instance, like if,
If you're not competitive anymore.
yeah, if Apple, for instance, doesn't decide that if they were getting their money from, the government and they stopped, why would they wanna come out with a new iPhone if they still have theirs? Why they wanna, make anything better? Well, that happens to all sorts of, corporations, really.
Yeah, you don't have the drive or the competition.
Yeah, so why not keep on going?
Be better. So,
And that would lead to more monopolies, which just isn't safe.
Technically legal, but
Okay.
Besides that.
Okay, so are you seeing the connection here, the ramification of fiscal policy decisions? Yeah, they grow and develop and expand on a regular basis to the point where they're gonna impact all the way down to each of us on an individual level. You have certain grants and loans that you can qualify as you get ready to go on to the next stage of your life. Fiscal policy will impact that. They may or may not have those things available to you, okay? All right, let's go on and try to look at monetary policy, okay? Pen keeps coming apart. Got another clip for you. And Ben Bernanke is again talking to a group of teachers. And I want you to kind of look at what is it that he is saying about what he does. Now keep in mind that he is the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve system that is out there kind of being the overseer of many of the banks, the banking system in this country. So when you look at this, be thinking about what it is that the Federal Reserve has the ability to do and what they don't have the ability to do. Do they have the ability to have taxes?
No.
Not really, because who is it that's the only one that can deal with taxes? The government, that fiscal policy, that's Congress, okay? So when you look at this, be paying attention to what it is that he says he can actually do and what has been done in the past, okay?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Our first question is from a teacher in the Richmond district who is with us today in the boardroom. Would you please introduce yourself and ask your question?
I'm Robert Handy from Fuller High School in Harford County, Maryland. What has been the greatest success as well as the greatest failure of the Federal Reserve in the last 100 years? And if you were teaching a high school U.S. history class today, what is the most important aspect of the Federal Reserve's role in history you would want students to understand?
Well, I hope that your students, if they come through civics or history, they learn about the Federal Reserve. It's a very, very important institution. It's had a huge impact in the almost back to our 100-year anniversary, about to celebrate our centennial. The Federal Reserve was founded in 1913. And it's been a tremendous, as I said, a tremendous part of U.S. economic history. I would say the greatest failure, to start there, is no doubt the Great Depression of the 1930s, to which the Federal Reserve made, unfortunately, an important contribution. The Fed was very slow to expand the money supply during the Great Depression. As a result, it countenanced a severe deflation or falling prices during the early 1930s. The Fed was also insufficiently proactive in trying to stabilize the financial system. As you probably know, about a third of all the banks in the United States failed during the 1930s, a tremendous collapse of our banking system. And those two things together were very important in making the Depression as steep and as long as it was. By the way, as we dealt with the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, we tried to take those lessons to heart. We tried to make sure that monetary policy was aggressive to prevent deflation, and we tried to take whatever steps were necessary to keep our banking system from collapsing. So at least we tried to learn from history. I think one of the most, or probably the most important success of the Federal Reserve in the past century was probably after the period of the 70s when we had a lot of inflation. The Federal Reserve under Chairman Paul Volcker brought down inflation, conquered inflation. We now have very, very low inflation, very stable prices. And in that process, in the 80s and the 90s, achieved quite a bit of prosperity and economic growth in the United States. And it was a very, very important contribution to that period. Going forward, I think students should understand those two elements of what the Fed has done and hasn't done. And the first is financial stability. It's very important for the Fed to contribute to keeping our financial system stable and productive. And secondly, price stability. Only the central bank can affect inflation, and keeping inflation low and stable is good for our economy, and it's a very important responsibility for the Fed.
Thank you.
Alright. Remember back, we talked about an argument, and after we dealt with the American Revolution, we talked about an argument between Jefferson and Hamilton. Anybody remember what that argument was about? Which one? The National Bank. So we had this National Bank, and what was it that the National Bank was supposed to do? Do you remember what
Like
that?
their views on what it should do. Jefferson wanted to be like the old English style bank where the government controlled everything. Like, is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, the currency and
They wanted to
banking.
make it like one solid currency, so it wasn't like separate states. There was a national currency set, so everything could go by that one type. Make it a lot easier to switch in between states and colonies.
Okay, so monetary policy. That deals with the Federal Reserve. When Ben Bernanke talked about it, did he talk about the Federal Reserve kind of being like a central bank?
Yes.
Okay, so the Federal Reserve is kind of it's like the central bank. And the central bank's primary focus is dealing with currency, right?
Yes.
And what is it they're trying to do with currency? Regulate it. So they're trying to keep it stable. When we talk about currency being stable, what do we mean by that?
Make sure that prices don't get too high or that they get too low or things like that.
So maintain the value of the money so prices are maintained. What did he talk about when he was talking about the Great Depression? What were some of the things that he mentioned were things of issue?
He said that the Federal Reserve didn't release enough money in time. They kept a tight monetary policy.
Okay, so they didn't put money in the system. What did he say that he did then in the 2008, 2009?
He looked at it, what happened in the depression, and he practiced what he's done.
Okay, so he put money in 08, 09,
Not
okay? So this right here tells us that they have control over the money supply. How much is out there? How much is available? What else did he talk about with the Great Depression that he needed to take care of?
America's really high inflation.
He talked about deflation. Deflation with the prices. But what else, what other system did he talk about?
We talked about how all the banks were shutting down, and that's so people couldn't get their money.
Okay, so what do you think the Federal Reserve System is supposed to do to help these guys out?
Well, not necessarily be enough, they can set regulations on loans and such. So, they loan money out to the banks, for the banks to loan back to people. So if they, decrease their interest rates on the loans that they're giving out to the banks, then the banks can also send more money out to the people. So we can get, easier loans maybe.
Okay, so provide a framework to help the banks have enough money. Okay, and they're gonna do that with their various regulations. Alright, we're gonna take, bell for lunch is gonna ring here in a minute. When we come back from lunch, what I want us to do is I want us to think about what he said about the greatest things that they achieved. Okay, so when you come back from lunch, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna re-show the clip. Okay, I'm gonna re-show the clip, and this time I want you to be paying attention to what is it that he's talking about with the things that the Federal Reserve did that was very positive and very helpful, their greatest achievements. Okay, and from that, we'll then take a look at what is then the loose and the tight money policy.